Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!
Welcome to Flat Earth United, with me, your host, Nathan Oakley. Joining me this evening is Johnny Cirucci to discuss the why of the globe lie. First and foremost, how are you doing, Johnny? Good to have you here.
I'm doing outstanding, Nathan. It's great to be back. I'm thrilled.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've been chatting. We lost touch a little bit, and I'm hoping we can pick up where we left off, because the last time we chatted, you very, very concisely and in detail went through the who of the globe lie, all roads leading to Rome. And I'm hoping in this conversation we're going to go through the why as well. Now, obviously, that'll involve the who, but maybe you can kick us off with what we were talking about before we actually went live.
Absolutely. I really consider this the missing pieces that so often get lost in this debate. It's such a controversial thing to give someone the shocking red pill that they live in a false reality. It really does alter you. I mean, people would rather, just like it's in the movie, Nathan, people would rather believe the lie because the truth shocks them and disturbs them, rocks their world so much. And so as a result, too many people get wrapped up into whether or not it's truth and then what's going on with the here and now, but they lose sight of the who and the why. You have to step back and say, well, okay, if we're being our own scientists, we're being our own astronomers, and we're realizing that there is no curvature, that the earth doesn't drop 8 inches every mile squared. I can see that myself if I look over a body of water and water naturally rises to its own level. I can see it across the Suez Canal of 100 miles and no noticeable curvature of the earth. Wow. I can see that as I look at the Chicago skyline. I see miles and there's no curvature. I do my own observations, and the sun and moon look to be, rather than me being told by an expert that the sun is 400 times bigger than the moon and just by coincidence happens to be 400 times further away. Well, why don't I not listen to you telling me what I see and just say they both look the same size to me? When you're able to have someone step back and have that sink in, it shocks them, and they, to the point where they lose sight of how all-encompassing this lie is. Science, astronomy, archaeology, paleontology, they all in lockstep, particularly astronomy, in lockstep promote this lie. What entity has that kind of power, and what could possibly be their motive? Some folks in our community just, well, it's to enslave us. Listen, I can think of some far more economical ways to enslave humanity than to completely recreate and refabricate a false reality for them to live in. Like we were talking about before we went live, I think I have the answer to that. There is nothing more powerful. There is no pull to a human being more powerful than the desire to save their eternal soul. For 1,000 years, from 500 AD to 1500 AD, the sole arbiter of that power was the Catholic Church. And before that, it was the Roman Empire, but of course not so much on a spiritual level, but certainly on a bodily level, on a temporal level. So 1,000 years, if anybody had any clue, any doubt about their eternal salvation, they relied entirely on the Catholic Church. And then with Martin Luther's protests that we just celebrated 500 years of, November 1st, 1517, suddenly there was a break from Rome. And here was an upstart. Not the first. There were quite a few prior to Luther who said, wait a minute, what you're teaching is not Christian. This idea of sacred pilgrimages, of me paying a priest money to get my loved one out of purgatory, it's called an indulgence. There's nothing in the Bible about that. Well, only the priest knew about that because only the priest was allowed access to the Bible. It was written in Latin, so you had to read Latin, and it was only available to the clergy. But every once in a while, you'd have clergy of conscience that would take a stand, and usually they get burned alive for it. Guys like Jan Hus and Jerome of Prague. William Tyndale there in England was betrayed. He translated the Bible into English and betrayed, and Henry VIII had him brought back and executed for Rome. The guy that broke from Rome. He would later show how he felt he was wrong, and he took the Tyndale Bible. Not the Tyndale, but the Tyndale Bible, and chained it in all of the Anglican churches. The problem was with Luther's protest is that, unlike all the previous renegades, the renegade clergy, Luther's protest was preceded in 1439 by a revolution in publishing. And really no more than 3 days' ride from Luther's location in Wittenberg, Johannes Gutenberg and the Gutenberg movable type printing press. Revolutionized publishing, revolutionized it. No longer did you have to have a master of each and every page, slowly created, whether carved out of wood or made out of some other material, which takes days in and of itself for a single page. Now you had keys that you can inset into a frame and in a short period of time create new pages. And this revolutionized publishing. And now they could publish things. For instance, one of the greatest things that Luther, I think, ever did was to translate the Bible into German. He actually unified Germany. And this is for another time. I just wrote a column about this. This is the basis of World War II. Traitors in the West hammered Germany, created the Nazi Reich, the Third Reich. Bernard Stanfel is a Jesuit priest. He wrote Mein Kampf for Hitler. This is how much they controlled it to punish Luther's homeland. Simple as I just wrote Butcher Harris, one of my latest columns. The firebombing of Cologne, Habsburg, Dresden. No purpose, no military purpose other than to punish the German people. It was Rome. They all answered to Rome. So this is how the printing press and Luther together revolutionized a revolt against Rome. Prior to this, the Inquisition, all they had to do was burn the Bibles, burn the protesters, and you were done with it for decades. There was nothing that could be recovered. But with the Gutenberg printing press now popping out these Bibles faster than they could be burned, you had a serious problem. People were reading for themselves doctrines that were maintained by the Catholic Church. For instance, the idea that you had to go through a priest, you had to confess your sins to a priest, and only clergy could hold the keys. That's why you see the two keys on the papal crest. The keys to, some say heaven and hell, some say spiritual and temporal, the gold and silver keys. If you want salvation for your soul, it has to be through the vicar of Christ, the so-called vicar of Christ, who believes himself equal to God, particularly when speaking ex cathedra. If you ever read a papal bull done ex cathedra, it's written in capitalized pronouns, we, us, thou, they, because the Pope believes that he's equal with God. So you now have a challenge that they could not answer with the fires of the Inquisition. They had a very, very serious problem. Bibles were getting out
just
too
before we go on to that bit though, because you've kind of, that's the most crucial detail, and this is what we were talking about just before we went live. That juxtaposition of God with a man on earth, the Pope. That's where the control, or the reason, the why, is that control given to an individual, i.e., that man.
Brilliant. It is the Christianity in its purest form is decentralized. Religion, clergy, priesthood, and really to a large degree, pastors, bishops, even elders, even though that does come from the Bible. The centralization of religion is anathema to Christianity. The early Christians gathered with friends and family in their home, and that's how they worshiped. They didn't all gather in a sacred place. It's in and of itself is very pagan. I just wrote a column on how every cathedral is built on the bones, the dead bodies of someone considered famous by that religion. Has nothing to do with Christianity. But the centralization of authority means control, Nathan. Centralization means control. You now can control what the people learn. You now can control what they believe. And Christianity in its purest form, particularly as taught by the Bible, threatens the power of the Catholic Church to control. I mean, here it's behind the indulgence controversy that had Martin Luther make his protest. As you had Dominican friars, Dominican monks like Tetzel. Tetzel was the one that kept going around in Germany and bilking the peasants in their ignorance, saying that you lost an infant, you have a high infant mortality, you lost a little boy, little girl. If you give me money, I will ask Giovanni de' Medici, Leo X, to pray your little baby out of purgatory. And it worked because they had no clue whether that was really Christian or not, because they didn't have access to the Bible. Now you had this upstart, number one, saying it's wrong. Number two, translating the Bible in German. Number three, having it disseminated en masse. Now you have a very, very serious problem. Then you have good men like Tyndale following in his footsteps. Actually went and studied in Germany to try and follow in Luther's footsteps before he began translating Bibles in English and having them smuggled back to England. You have this proliferation of Bibles that is now telling people they don't need the Pope to save their souls. It is a problem of cataclysmic proportions for the papacy. How can they possibly wrest back the monopoly they had on people's souls? Because as we just said earlier, there is nothing more powerful than having you come to me for the salvation of soul. You will do anything. You will betray your own country. And I don't remember how much of this we said off air and on air. People have committed unbelievable crimes for the papacy as members of their own nation. Unbelievable crimes, because they believe their loyalty no longer is due to any oath they took for their country. They believe their loyalty is owed to the Pope. And this is controversies that goes particularly England, that goes back hundreds of years.
So I just want to get this in here, because this is the absolute crux of it. So when you say control, you specifically mean control over the soul, and that was a very chilling example. When you talk about a child, it will instantly hit home exactly what you're talking about. But that's what you are. Let's not make any bones about who's making this example here. But yeah, that's what you're saying. It's about control of people's soul. And if you can give that to an individual, if you can give that to a man and take it away from God, then you have the ultimate power.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. The essence of Christianity is very, very simple. Love Jesus, go to heaven. Don't need clergy, don't need bishops, don't need the Pope. Don't have to confess your sins to a priest in order to be absolved from them. That was incredible power. Is incredible power. And there's more than a few stories of how priests, and particularly Jesuits, have betrayed the sanctity of the confessional in order to get some sort of very critical intelligence up to the papacy for them to win more power. Nothing could be more important to the papacy than to have that control over people's souls, to have people truly believe that anything that was important to them, they threw it aside. Like what I said a few minutes ago, any oath they took means nothing over their soul. To break the oath to save your soul. Your audience can look up the word investiture. Investiture controversies, particularly in England. Who's John's father? I want to say Henry II, I think, was John's father. Also, and his brother was Richard Lionheart. Investiture controversies destroyed England's sovereignty. And also showed the power of the Pope. Kings of England realized that even though they had citizens of England, and most times they did not, who were bishops and cardinals, they were transplants, very often from very Catholic, Roman Catholic France. So you had a Frenchman as the archdiocese cardinal, archdiocese bishop, very obviously, clearly, as an insurgent, as a visiting army, answering to an outside authority. He doesn't care what the regent says, doesn't care what the king says. And so there were several countries, both with Henry and with John particularly. They wanted to pick their own cardinals and bishops. And the Pope said, no, I'm picking your bishop for you, and they're going to answer to me. And the investiture controversy caused, particularly John Longshanks, to take his crown off his head and give it to the papal legate. And essentially turn England. I hope you know that since that time, England has been owned by the papacy. All you got to do is look at your own crown jewels and see how many, the fleur de lis, the Maltese cross, all of that. That's papal iconography and imagery, and Gnostic, by the way, before that.
Sure, I'm sure we went through this on the other show, didn't we, with some of the garb, some of the clothes that the Queen wears.
You bet. And it is reputed, and I believe the pictures I've seen, that she is a Dame of Malta. QE2 is a Dame of Malta. There's a very convincing photograph of her in a cloak with a big Maltese cross on it.
Right.
So this power was lost with Luther's Reformation because of the proliferation of Bibles. It was a wildfire. It was a revolution, a literal revolution. People were leaving their subsistence. The Rome was losing control. People were no longer believing in their local priest as the arbiter of their salvation. How could you possibly fight that? You get to the Bibles, it's too late. The printing press has put the Bibles everywhere. There is a way that you can fight that and give control of people's souls back to the papacy, and that's to destroy the Bible. Destroy the legitimacy of the Bible. Turn it into a laughable book of myths and legends. And the author, Frederick Tupper Saucy, credits Henry's Chancellor, Lord Chancellor, Thomas Wolsey, Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, with this tactic, which he called learning against learning, which is to create another layer of reality. And it was started with astronomy and a Roman Catholic priest named Nicholas Copernicus. And many in the audience might say, Copernicus? Copernicus was a priest? It's one of the best kept secrets by the papacy. Nicholas Copernicus was a priest. How do we know? In 1537, King Sigismund of Poland, now Copernicus was Polish, Sigismund of Poland put Copernicus up as a candidate to become Bishop of Ermland. You can't become a bishop unless you're already an ordained priest. And by the way, Copernicus spent his entire life without getting married, which also lends credence. And that fact I just gave you came from the Catholic Encyclopedia. It is absolutely key to know that his seminal work, De Revolutionibus Orbium Celestium, was published in 1543. Okay, what date did I just give you a little earlier? 1517 was when Luther nailed his 95 Theses on the doors of All Saints Cathedral. At that moment, things started to go downhill. And after the Inquisition examined him at Worms, the Diet of Worms, they knew they weren't getting him back. And worse, the Elector of Saxony, Frederick the Wise, kidnapped him before they had a chance to kill him, because there was an attempt to assassinate him. He was not going to make it from Worms back to Wittenberg. And so Frederick III, Elector of Saxony, kidnapped him and put him up in Wartburg Castle, safekeeping. At that point, they realized they had lost this battle. There was too much out. He was too popular. There was a Bundschuh revolt of peasants that had already threatened the Inquisition. You harm our favorite priest, and there's going to be revolt in the street. And there really was. Anyway, they started to loot churches and pull all the wealth out of them. And Luther stood against that. But they had to come up with this new tactic of taking all these Bibles and giving the control back to the papacy. And it was Wolsey's learning against learning to create a new reality. What happened after Copernicus? Galileo Galilei. Now, what is the story that we've all been told about Galileo Galilei? We love him so much that we just call him by his first name, Galileo. He was such a great man. He taught us the reality of our surroundings. It was that hero of astronomy, Galileo Galilei. And it was the Catholic Church that persecuted him unfairly. The Inquisition. Saint Robert Bellarmine, Jesuit priest, examined him, put him on trial. And what happened, Nathan? Do you know what happened to Galileo after he was put on trial by the Inquisition? They found him guilty and gave him house arrest.
House arrest, right. Exactly. Terrible punishment.
Now, I don't know if your audience knows anything about the Inquisition. But when the Inquisition doesn't like you, house arrest is not on the menu.
Right.
One of their favorites was to hang you by your arms backwards and then put a weight around your ankles so that your arms ripped out of their sockets. That was the nicest thing they did. Burn you alive, gut you, pull your intestines out while you're alive. This is what the Inquisition, the Christian Inquisition, some of the things they used to do when they really didn't like people.
Yeah, that's what
House
they did.
arrest for Galileo
That's what they
Galilei.
did to Tyndale, right? They burnt him alive for translating the Bible.
Tyndale, they did. Now, they had respect for how well loved he was. He was a man of conscience, a man of integrity, and a priest. And so they were nice enough to strangle him before burning him. Wasn't that nice?
I didn't know that.
Unfortunately, that really wasn't the way most executions went. Most of them were burned alive. Cranmer, Thomas Cranmer, a good English Protestant, he was burned alive. He didn't get to be strangled first. So you had this push now to create a new reality. And poor Galileo Galilei, where did he go to really study, to really work hard, to really come up with these new disciplines? You know where that was? He was moved to the Collegio Roma, the first university created by Ignatius Loyola. The very first Jesuit college is where Galileo Galilei was brought in to come up with spinning globe Earth astronomy. So now, when I read that, I was like kind of confused. No, wait, was he an enemy of the papacy, or was he like really in tight? Because if I didn't like this guy, I don't think I'd bring him to my seminal watershed. I mean, Jesuit universities are just the premier. We even have our president himself. Donald Trump spent 2 years with the Jesuits at Fordham before he transferred to get a secular education at the University of Pennsylvania. By the way, I also think that the have information the University of Pennsylvania is controlled by the Jesuits too. So I don't know about you, man, but if I didn't like somebody, I don't think I'd bring him in to finish his work right there next to Father Christoph Clavius, who gave us our modern calendar, Christoph Clavius and the Gregorian calendar, the Jesuit calendar. I hope everybody in the audience knows that. Everything that we have, and there's something in the book of Daniel about how this evil, this ultimate evil, changes times and dates and places for us. That fits the bill for me. So you now have this beginning of astronomy and this recreation of what astronomy is. We mentioned earlier about experts telling you that the sun and moon are actually radically different in size. Well, wait a minute. I make my own observation. They're the same size. No, don't believe your own eyes. Believe what I tell you. I'm the expert. Let me see if I come up with this. All the ridiculous numbers of movement in the universe. I actually wrote them down.
Prepare for lots of digits, those of you in the audience.
All right, so the Earth is spinning at 1,000 miles an hour. at the equator, right? The Earth revolves around the sun at 67,000 miles an hour. The solar system moves through the Milky Way at 500,000 miles an hour. The Milky Way moves through the universe at 670 million miles an hour, and yet the North Star is right there. How is that possible? How is that possible? Oh, well, it's an optical illusion, Nathan. It's an optical illusion. It only seems like it's rock solid and steady. It's because it's so far away. It's an optical illusion. There's one of those opticals. Now, I'm making my own observation myself. The North Star is right there. Where's all this movement? And we can get into some more physics about how much does a mosquito weigh, and yet you've got this movement of 1,000 miles per hour at the equator. Get into all this other stuff I'm sure you've done over and over again about aircraft and helicopters and all this. I don't understand. I'm making my own observations, and I'm not seeing this. And the experts are telling you. Albert Einstein will give you his theory of relativity to explain all this, but you're not going to understand it. Actually, that's exactly why he was given a theory of relativity. Do you know who his handler was, who his mentor were? Georges Lemaitre. Georges Lemaitre, a Jesuit-trained Roman Catholic priest and the father of the Big Bang. Did you know that? The father of the Big Bang was a Jesuit-trained Roman Catholic priest? Now, why would they do that? Why do they have so much invested in astronomy? They own their own. They took over the University of Arizona's observatory on Mount Graham. They actually contorted this. They have some crazy supposed binocular nuclear something. You know what the acronym of it is? Lucifer.
Right.
Why would the Jesuits have an observatory with machinery there they call Lucifer, supposedly for seeing into space? It's all part of the who and the why. Tycho Brahe was supposedly the last great geocentrist. As far as I'm concerned, geocentrism is heliocentrism light. It already acknowledges all the spinning globes and foolishness. But it recognizes some of the constants that we all see and sort of is a middle ground. Tycho Brahe died at 54 years old, young, of a supposed bladder infection. His understudy was Johannes Kepler, a Lutheran. So in 1597, Franz Ferdinand II of Austria banished. He was a good Catholic. Now, whenever the Catholics are in control, Christians and Protestants suffer horribly. When the most Protestant sovereigns ever to rule in England, besides Oliver Cromwell, Elizabeth I and James I, when they ruled, they put just as many Protestants to the stake as they did Catholics. When Mary, Bloody Mary, Mary I ruled, the daughter of Catherine of Aragon and Henry VIII, when Mary ruled, she burned alive 300 Protestants just because they were Protestants, men, women, and children. So when Catholics are in charge, you're in trouble. When non-Catholics, when Protestants are in charge, the Protestants are still in trouble. So Franz Ferdinand II of Austria banished all Protestants, good Catholic he was, from Austria. The Jesuits in his ear intervened and said, bring Kepler back. And that's exactly what they did. They made him the royal astronomer. And they gave him all of Brahe's data, and he completely rewrote it to be heliocentric. Now, why would they do that? Because this is the who and the why. We can get into go down a rabbit hole about Darwin and archaeology and how there is such a thing as hoaxes, how you can have paleontologists and archaeologists committing hoaxes to bolster Darwinian evolution. And did you know that one of the worst hoaxes of all time, Piltdown Man, was done by a Jesuit priest, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin? Y'all know that in the audience? what is a Jesuit priest doing in archaeology, number one? What is a Jesuit priest in archaeology doing committing a hoax, number two? The who and the why. It is to take back the power of the soul and give it to the vicar of Christ. What do you think? You want to go anywhere with it?
I think that needs to sink in for a moment, hence I left a small pause.
Sure. The who and the why. There is no power greater. To this very day, committed Catholics will and are committing treason. I mentioned to you earlier about Navy SEALs who have committed some of the most heinous acts. For instance, this ridiculous psyop of the killing of bin Laden. One of the greatest examples of that. Who killed bin Laden? They don't even know. There's so many different guys saying, well, no, I killed bin Laden. No, I'm the SEAL that killed bin Laden. Eric Prince, Mr. Blackwater, Mr. War Profiteering himself, devoted Roman Catholic. Let me pull up this article real quick. The individual who claims to have killed bin Laden, good Roman Catholic guy by the name of Rob O'Neill. I have an article here from the Sun, your son, Rob O'Neill. Killing bin Laden wrecked my life. Now, the guy who supposedly killed bin Laden has this terrible drinking problem. Got thrown off a plane for being drunk. Got divorced because he's a wreck. Wait a minute, dude. Did you kill bin Laden or not? Are you not the greatest hero since Superman? Why are you a mess? You're a mess because you broke your oath. You betrayed the American people because you answer to Rome. And it's not just for souls. They also like to blackmail people with pedophilia. Any crime you can possibly think of. And so there's a whole host, there's a whole range of ways they can control. But there's nothing that controls best like the fear of eternal hellfire.
Right.
The whole
this is
purpose.
Back to your example with the child. You know, you can save the child's soul from purgatory.
That was the essence of the controversy. To this very day, do you know there are still indulgences to this very day where you can make a gift to the Catholic Church and receive some sort of spiritual benefit out of that, according to them? Indulgences. To this very day, there are still indulgences in the Catholic Church. And this is what infuriated Luther. The bilking of the peasantry by their ignorance because they didn't know what the Bible said. Now you have a very serious problem. There are Bibles out there. How do you make them question what the Bible says? When the Bible says 4 corners of the earth, when the Bible says the sky is rolled out like a scroll, when the Bible says God asked Joshua to make the sun stand still in its rotation, well, that's ludicrous. That's crazy. That's not science. That's not astronomy. It's been recreated. It is the who and the why of our enslavement, of a massive false reality. I think I was off the air. I was talking to you earlier about how my latest book, with the Eaters of Children, is on, I call it the pedocracy. How the abuse, the rape and abuse and murder of children is used, and everybody in power does it. Everybody in power. You're either a rapist, a murderer, or a victim. Sometimes both. And that's what I found out in my book, Eaters of Children, is that victims have choices too. Barack Obama, for instance, was a victim. And it's sad, but when you are a victim, it makes you more mentally malleable. It breaks you down. It makes it easier to implant suggestion. I don't want to say mind control because that's a term that is mocked. Mind manipulation is a better phrase. And that's what they do. And they all partake in it. I've seen evidence that makes me believe that Donald Trump has had sex with his own daughter. All you got to do is look it up. Look up Donald Trump, inappropriate Ivanka Trump, and you will see some pictures that really disturb you. And then if you go on a regular search of the internet, you'll hear some audio that disturbs you. Interview he did with Howard Stern, some interviews he did on television. What do you have in common with your daughter? Sex, but I'm not supposed to say that. Look at her. She's a good-looking girl. If she weren't my daughter, I'd be dating her. That's Donald Trump. Oh, Donald Trump. Yeah, he's not a pedophile. One of the worst pedophile pimps, a guy by the name of Jeffrey Epstein. Good friend of Donald Trump's. Good party pal. Same Bill Clinton. Good party pal. Look up Jeffrey Epstein and his orgy island where he kidnaps children and brings them there to be raped by the rich and shameless.
I mean, what this makes me sort of want to bring a segue to is this is the extreme end of control of the people at the top ends of the perceived power that we are under. Whereas what we're dealing with here on YouTube is far more benign, but yet directly related with what you've gone through in terms of how the formulation of the heliocentric structure has come from these people. And the why, control, you've summed up beautifully, but how can you get from the extreme nature of control of the elite back to the control of me as an individual through the heliocentric deception?
The flat earth reality that we live in is the red pill that frees armies, literally millions of people, Nathan. That red pill frees, and it's the craziest thing. The chains that are holding them, the key is sitting right in front of them. Question authority. Don't believe media, scientists, teachers, politicians. Question everything. If you were able to simply have someone make their own observations, and it dawns on them that what they've been told is wrong, the idea that they have been so thoroughly lied to by a massive conspiracy and system that includes teachers, scientists, historians, archaeologists, that's it, brother. You have freed literally millions of soldiers in an army of revolt.
No, the programming's too good. The programming makes them revolt against us. They don't like the red pill. Sorry, get the pills in the right order. And that's kind of maybe what my question is. Why is the blue pill so good? And no, it's answering its own question in itself, isn't it? The blue pill is that good. The heliocentric deception, the chains, the cuffs that you say the keys are in front of you. Well, people will literally spit in the face of the key. You know, they will deny it.
Human nature. It's human nature, and it works. It works in the favor of the machine.
Right.
The more satisfied you are. The more satisfied you are, the less you're willing to rock the boat. And so our community, our audience, your audience of maybe younger guys and girls, folks who do kind of question authority, folks who may not be stepping into a great situation because their education has failed them as it's supposed to. It's supposed to fail them. It's not supposed to give them the tools they need for success. And so they are kind of questioning things. It's heavily infiltrated. And the most important thing is to have the people who are satisfied, exactly what you said, work against it. And I was telling you, I'm pretty sure it was before the show, and I only have 11 reviews on Amazon for my book, Eaters of Children. And the one negative review slanders me as a flat earther. And it's all it does. Our cosmology never enters into my third book because it explodes the pedocracy, what I call the pedocracy. And yet they use normalcy bias as a weapon. They don't give you a chance to lay out the premise. It's been so sickeningly successful. And by the way, this also works in my favor as far as the who and the why. How can you possibly have a plot that has spanned since when? Right after Protestant Reformation? 15, what did I say? De Revolutionibus, published in 1543. So you've got a plot that's spanning 500 years and counting. And it includes all authority. Is there anyone, and a single accredited astronomer anywhere, who openly admits that he questions our cosmology? And yet, the average person on the street can do their own computations and clearly see there's no curvature. Yet you've got PhDs who refuse to have the courage to do that. How do you have that level of power, and why? There's a line in the movie Spotlight, the 2015 movie Spotlight, with Michael Keaton, Liev Schreiber, about the priest pedophile scandals in the Archdiocese of Boston. And there's supposed to be this lawyer there, Garabedian, that's fighting on behalf of the victims, and he's telling Mark Ruffalo, actor Mark Ruffalo, the church thinks in centuries. He's portraying a journalist named Resendez. The church thinks in centuries, Mr. Resendez. It really does. Who has that kind of power? Who has the ability to sit down and make century-long plans? And why would they? The Catholic Church, it's about power and it's about control.
Yeah, control of the soul. It's got to be added in there.
Nothing motivates more. Nothing motivates more. People will commit any heinous act if they think their eternal soul depends upon it. They absolutely will. In 2015, the Jesuit Pope, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, Pope Francis I, gave his victory tour and was invited to a full house in Congress. He had the Jesuit-trained John Boehner on the one side, Republican, and he had the devout Roman Catholic Joe Biden on the other. He had Republicans and Democrats, supposedly left and right, all throughout the audience, all good Roman Catholics. He stood between the two fasci in the Capitol Rotunda. Capitol, you know what Capitol means? Capitol comes from Capitoline Hill, one of the ancient seven hills of Rome, mentioned in the book of Revelation. Between the two fascia, you know what a fascia is? A fascia is it is a spear or a battle axe wrapped in a bundle of rods, symbolizing rule by one.
Right, the Pope.
Rule by one.
The Pope, not God, not the Creator, but a man on earth with all the power.
That is the push. That is the why. That is the ultimate agenda. And they have had total control of America, unfortunately, maybe even since its founding.
I mean, this sounds like a relevant side note, but have you got a similar level of respect for the blue pill, for how clever the heliocentric deception actually is?
It is powerful. It is thoroughly powerful. And that normalcy bias, man, it controls you. And like we were saying earlier, the worst thing that can happen, so this works in our favor. They constantly foment fear over World War III and the zombie apocalypse, but actually, that's not what they want. They want as many people as possible to be satisfied and to not question authority. They don't want chaos. Chaos does not work in their favor. Now, they will occasionally foment chaos in order to rebuild unity and organization out of chaos, which is what they want eventually. But they have to use the Hegelian to do it. They can't allow too much because they need satisfied people.
Yeah, they have to use the Hegelian dialectic. There's no other way to do it. You can't just have chaos. You're absolutely correct.
And so that's their ultimate game. That is the end game.
I mean, for anybody who might be in doubt of the who element of it. This was something, as I say earlier, I think I titled the show something like the Jesuit heliocentric deception with Johnny Cirucci. So check out that video. It's one of the more popular videos on this channel. But yeah, so check out that video because you go into quite a lot of depth. So for anybody who's in the audience that are going, the Jesuits responsible for it all? What? The Pope's in control of everything? What? This sounds like... Well, no, just check it out. It's about an hour long. But yeah, well worth a watch. And I like, with any story, the why is the most important element. You know, why are we being controlled? Why are we... What's the point? And that's often the first question you get from a normie if Flat Earth is raised. Well, why? What's the point? Why would they lie about it? And this is kind of where we're getting to. And you have to experience the deception from the outside to be able to do this. So for anybody who's watching it that's sucking on a blue pill, you'll just be throwing ridicule this way. And I don't care. I don't know about you, Johnny.
I am a slave to truth. I no matter how much it hurts, I have to. Why compromise? Why compromise at all? And it does. It pulls you in because this is so powerful, Nathan. It's so powerful that they will mock you for being a proponent of the truth, and they won't give you the opportunity to explain it. But all we can do is attempt to give that. That's my highest priority. I really hope that my 3 books, Illuminati Unmasked, Secret History, and Eaters of Children, thousands, literally thousands of citations. I invite audience members, readers, listeners to go and do it for yourself. You do have to question this because you are a slave. And the system does not like you. The system is poisoning you. You're dying before your time. They're enslaving you. They're turning your children against you. They're taking your children. They're raping your children. The system hates you. You may feel comfortable in this system. You are a slave. And the system hates you.
I'm hoping this won't get a bad reaction, but I wouldn't be doing myself any service if I didn't question these things. So you said lots and lots of citations, and there's plenty of people in the Flat Earth arena that are questioning history itself. So in terms of sort of primary sources for these citations and the people that you reference, what's your research methodology?
I think my saving grace is that I'm all over the place. I use anyone and anything that is mainstream, reputable to, I will go from CNN to the Daily Kos. I will use, and a lot of this stuff, for instance, here's a good example. Cynical truth seekers will see how the truth is allowed and accepted, but then spun. For instance, Bill Clinton, supposedly a Baptist, supposedly doesn't really know who his father is. My information, my column, Can We Finally Call Hillary a Roman, lays out how Bill Clinton is almost certainly the illegitimate son of Winthrop Rockefeller. Winthrop Rockefeller is a transplant from New York State to Arkansas, sexual deviant, bisexual, slept around, and almost certainly has his illegitimate son was Bill Clinton. Put Bill Clinton in the De Molay Club for Boys. That's Jacques de Molay, the Templar. Carefully watched over him, made sure he was a Rhodes Scholar, made sure he got a draft deferment. And then who did he deliver Bill Clinton in to for raising? Father Richard McSorley, Jesuit priest, the hippie priest, the far left protesting priest, Richard McSorley. So there is a crazy article out there that says that Bill Clinton traipsed through Eastern Europe when he wasn't even allowed to. How is it even possible? And got a tour through communist countries and ended in Moscow to be fully trained in communism. Now, there are some sources that acknowledge that. As crazy as that sounds, the piece that I have says the one who gave him his tour was Father Richard McSorley. The Washington Post admits Bill Clinton met Richard McSorley in Europe, but it was an accidental meeting. So this is how we sleuth things. We have an accusation that a Jesuit gave Bill Clinton a tour of communist East Europe through to Moscow, and a mainstream source admits the connection. To me, that gives legitimacy to the accusation. So you see how the citations and the hypotheses and the proofs work. We're the only ones that really use the scientific method, Nathan. Make an observation, formulate a hypothesis, put together an experiment, isolate the variables, attempt to replicate your observation. If you're able to replicate your observation, it's repeatable, then you hand it over a peer to proof it. That's the scientific method. It's very simple. It's very simple. I hand that to you and encourage you to proof it yourself.
Sure.
And you don't have to buy my books yet. You can just go right online. I have, right off the bat, I try to have 2 or 3 hyperlinks for every paragraph of acceptable sources that run the gamut. Like I said, from CNN to the Daily Kos, from the Washington Post to Fox News. They all have to, then here's the key. Learning against learning. The lie isn't powerful unless it's wrapped in truth.
Oh no, I totally agree with you with that. I was more kind of going along the lines of things like Galileo, Galilei, and actual primary sources for these people who are referenced throughout history. I mean, we could keep going back indefinitely, but I'll keep it to those because they're very flat earthy.
You bet. You asked. Let's put this right out to the audience. Where did Galileo Galilei do his seminal work? Where did he study? The Collegio Roma. The first Jesuit college. Ignatius Loyola himself founded the Collegio Roma. What the heck is Galileo Galilei doing at the University of the Inquisition? The Inquisition. The Dominicans were the attack dogs, the pit bulls of the papacy. The Jesuits were so vicious and so good at it that it was taken from the Dominicans and given to the Jesuits. How is it that Galileo Galilei was the enemy of the papacy, was the enemy of the Vatican, was persecuted by the Inquisition run by the Jesuits, and yet he's there working at the Collegio Roma in Rome? Now, this is admitted by them. You can find their sources that tell you he was at the Collegio Roma. This is what I mean.
But wouldn't you automatically and instinctively then question them purely based on the origin of the source?
Question. I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, we're in a world of deception, so ultimate skepticism ultimately applies. So if you're, I mean, I'm not saying that you can't parrot the narrative that they have put out, but that's how it would be seen by someone skeptical.
It's just one tenet. It's just one tenet. You build the supposition on a series of tenets, a series of questions. For instance, like we started from the very beginning, the father of heliocentrism is a Catholic priest. The man who stood by the side of Tycho Brahe before his untimely death was a supposed Lutheran who was personally recommended by Jesuit priests. The guy who was supposedly prosecuted by Jesuits never really suffered. And then he worked with the Jesuits. So it's all these things coming together where it says, oh, okay, well, maybe I question whether, I don't know why you'd question where it was. It's several historical sources admit, College of Rome. That intertwines with all these other facts to show you the who and the why. So when you have deception, take your premise, don't throw it out just yet, question it, be skeptical, and then look at other sources. They can't all say the same lie. They can't all be on the same sheet of music. There has to be the kernel of truth that they go their deception with. And one of their favorites is disinformation by omission. And I like to use the example JFK, the movie Oliver Stone movie JFK. Great movie. It's what the movie didn't tell you. Stopped well short of connecting the dots to Rome. And I go on to explain how so many of these individuals, Clay Shaw worked in Rome during World War II. They're not going to tell you that during the movie. David Ferry was a Catholic, wanted to be a Catholic priest. He was supposedly, they did do this a little bit in the movie, Joe Pesci. He just wanted to be a Catholic priest, but as soon as they found out he was homosexual, they frogged him. Now, has that ever stopped the Catholic Church ever? A priest being homosexual, has that ever stopped the Catholic Church? No. They had another use for David Ferry. David Ferry, by the way, Jesuit educated. A good Roman Catholic.
There was one term you used that I didn't quite follow along. I'm sure I'm going to get this wrong, but you said something like they're using the normalization principle and that works in our favor. Have I got that term right?
Yeah, normalcy bias.
Normalcy bias, that's it.
Yeah, normalcy bias.
What do you mean by that?
It's the blue pill. It's the blue pill. If you're comfortable questioning what is normal is a problem for you. Normalcy bias. You have a bias not to question authority because you are comfortable in your situation. I mean, think about it, bro. You try to tell somebody that they're living a lie, they're going to instinctively deny it, especially if they're comfortable. You go and talk to somebody who's down and out, who's lost everything, and then tell them they're living a lie. They say, yeah, man, tell me about it. You go and tell somebody that's comfortable.
Kind of like an appeal to consensus or appeal to the mass populace.
Oh, you bet. You bet. And then they take that and then they stir in plenty of emotion and ad hominem attacks. They will never take someone like you or I and argue facts. They'll just throw insults. What are you kidding me? Were you a flat earther? Look up how many times Barack Obama mocked flat earth. What the heck is that coming into on the tele? Why is the president of the United States reading that on his teleprompter? Pardon me, that's probably because he's got Jesuit speechwriters like John Favreau on his team telling him what to mock.
But you've kind of asked that rhetorically, but the reason that he's doing that is to maintain that level of ridicule. You've got to keep the idea that flat Earth is the idea of Philistines cemented firmly, but subtly. You know, it's not like he was mentioning it all day, every day. He just dropped it into 2 or 3 speeches, let's be honest here.
Because that emotional reaction disconnects people from questioning it critically and or thinking critically. It all adds to the culture of ridicule, the culture of emotion. This is why they like to play the race card. You watch, I tell you here in America, you watch mainstream news and it's blatant, obvious. This ridiculous story about the 2 black men that got thrown out of a Starbucks in Seattle. I mean, they played that for days. Local news played that for days. Are you kidding me? That's a nothing story. Why are you doing that? It's to make people disconnect their logical thought processes and allow emotion to rule them, whether it's ridicule or racial hatred. If you're not thinking critically and clearly, they own you. And that's where the normalcy bias comes in.
Right.
You're not going to dare to go against your neighbors, your friends, your own family. Are you kidding me? Are you stupid, flat earther?
Yeah, you got to maintain the ridicule from all angles. And the amount of times I hear that 99% of people can't be wrong. Well, yeah, they can be, and that's how good the blue pill is. But as we're coming up on about an hour, could you maybe plug your books, let people know where they can get them, what the titles are, and then we'll
God bless you. I'd be pleased to. Absolutely. My first book was Illuminati Unmasked. All 3 of them you can get at Amazon.com, and Amazon, fortunately, is international all across our flat Earth. You can get them. Amazon UK, all anywhere. Illuminati Unmasked is the first one, and that's where the general idea, general topics, break people into these shocking ideas. My second book is Secret History, and Secret History is kind of like the prequel to Illuminati and Bias. Lays out the history behind this. I get into John and Henry and Charles and the Inquisition and Martin Luther, and lays down the details of the historical background. And in my third book, talks about this really shocking control, the pedophilia I called pedocracy, and the corruption across the board in governments, law enforcement, judges, prosecutors. Eaters of Children is the name of that third book. And I actually went with my full name, Giovanni Agostino Cirucci. But all three, if you just plug in Johnny Cirucci, they should all three come up. I use my nickname Johnny in the first two books as author. Illuminati and Mass, Secret History, and Eaters of Children, all through Amazon.com. Website is johnnycirucci.com. You can write me at johnny@johnnycirucci.com. And I got a show, Resistance Rising, on Blog Talk. I think that's everything.
You got a show. So I missed the last one. Resistance Rising on Blog Talk. Did you say?
Yes. It's the flagship is Blog Talk Radio. It's Resistance Rising, and it's carried by Blog Talk, Spreaker, and iTunes. And if I'm lucky and all the stars and moon and sun and everything lines up, it won't get blocked by YouTube. Spreaker will send it over to YouTube, but I don't rely on it. You can go, as a matter of fact, you go to johnnycirucci.com, and there's a button on the menu for podcasts. You can just go directly. There's an embedded player with all the links and notes. I take copious notes and send them on for each and every show. I've been doing. I'm coming up on 175 episodes of, as a matter of fact. And
that's Resistance Rising.
Yes, sir. Resistance Rising is the name of the podcast. Yep.
Cool. Excellent stuff. Anything else you want to plug?
You, man, I am so grateful for you. It's funny because I gave you a hard time. You were sending out notes about your live streams, and I was like, "Oh, dude, are you making fun of me because you're famous and I'm not?" And here you came back and said, "Were you kidding me? I think you're famous." I'm not famous. No, I'm not famous. You're famous. So here we are talking because I gave you a hard time over this, and you did the conscientious, friendly thing. I said, "Dude, why don't you just come back and we'll talk about this stuff?" So props to you, brother. I want to promote you.
Now, I'll give a bit more clarity to that to the audience, because there's certain people like Dave Murphy and Dave Weiss and Patricia, Mark, yourself, that I look up to, and you do place these people on a pedestal. We're all just people. I know this. You don't have to, reiterate this. But ultimately speaking, there's people out there that have done huge amounts more research than I will ever do, and are very eloquent in conveying that information to an audience, linking up all the dots. And, there's a good reason why the show, I'll plug that actually. So yeah, the Jesuit Heliocentric Deception with Johnny Cirucci, check that out. But yeah, there's a good reason that's a very popular video, because the information's concise but detailed, and you're good at linking up the dots. So it's been a really nice conversation. So with that, I'll say first and foremost, a massive, huge thank you to you, Johnny Cirucci, for being on Flat Earth United. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, brother. I look forward to any opportunity in the future to come back and talk to you some more.
No, it definitely has been a pleasure, and I hope I do see you again soon. Also, I will say a massive, huge, enormous thank you to all of the live audience for tuning in and hopefully sharing this show with Johnny. It's been a real pleasure, so thank you to all who tuned in. I've been Nathan Oakley, and I will see you all in the next video.
Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!